Today I continue my journey in the most ruthless and unforgiving roguelike there is. After failing to defeat the final boss in my previous 100 days video, I am now back to try again and get that day counter up to 200. By the way, feel free to check out my first 100 days of Noita if you haven't already, where I try to get a hang of the mechanics and enemies mainly by dying over and over again. The rules stay the same in that every attempt counts as a day, and of course I once again made it a point to not look up any guides or wikis throughout my playthrough. Because, you know, what's life without a bit of suffering? That of course excludes the vague hints and tips you guys gave me in the comments of the last video, which were very helpful actually, so keep them coming. But enough of the rambling, let's get started and see if I have what it takes to finally beat this game. My 101st run started just like the last one ended, with everything being on fire for no apparent reason. It's been a while since I last played Noita, but this already sets the mood just right. But at least I instantly found a wand, even though it only has a circle of shielding spell attached to it. Hey, if I have learned one thing in all of my runs, then that I should be thankful for everything I can get my hands on. Speaking of which, I then grabbed a potion and killed my first enemy. I tried to kill the next one with the wagon for some extra gold, but of course I failed, so I started blasting. I received my first damage of the challenge from this shotgun dude over here, but it's no big deal since this is only the first biome and I already cleared it hundreds of times. Should be easy, right? A little bit later I stumbled across this fire dude, which I always have problems dealing with. Luckily, I got a decent secondary wand at the start and managed to give him a taste of his own medicine. And after dealing with the poison jellyfish, I went on to pick up my well-earned reward. Alright, I forgot this dude bleeds lava. Not much later, I stumbled across a wand submerged in polymorph potion, but no matter how fast I tried to pick it up, I was always transformed before I could do so. And since I didn't want to waste all of my firebolts, I decided to just leave it there. And would you look at that, just a few steps further I found another wand which was way easier to grab. I then went on to kill some of the enemies to farm some gold when suddenly this giant floating poison eye hits me in the face with one of its attacks, nearly killing me. And since I didn't want my first run to end like this, I noped out. With only 16 HP remaining, I made sure not to take too many risks defeating the next enemies and even managed to kill the next poison eye thing from a safe distance. I even remembered I could set the toxic clouds on fire. Look at me, understanding the game mechanics. After that I let a dynamite stick explode way too close to me and then made my way through the portal to the first safe zone. Here I can tinker with wands, something I completely forgot to show in the last video but found out about 15 runs in, replenish my health and spell charges and also buy new wands, spells and pick up one of the 3 randomized perks. But since all of the wands were either too expensive or just not good, at least in my opinion, I picked up the toxic immunity perk and went on to the cold pits, where I immediately was greeted by some lava bees. I tried taking them on, but since there was a nest nearby, they just kept coming, and with my lack of firepower and aim, I made a run for it. I then got driven into a corner by some goo bats, but managed to kill them rather quickly, even if I lost some health in the progress. And after needing like 7 hits for the next enemy, I knew that I needed a more powerful main wand. Luckily, I found one just around the corner. Yep, that should do it. Shortly after, I found the next portal but decided to go explore a little bit more to farm some gold and potentially find some upgrades. So I ran around, killed some enemies and then accidentally fell into another portal without finding anything. The next safe room had some spells I could purchase and the electricity immunity perk, which I picked up. I then bought the concentrated light spell to have a better main wand, and to be honest, I still don't know what exactly all of the stats on my wands mean. I have a general idea like that non-shuffling wands cast one spell after another, or that cast delay reduces the time between casts, but overall it's still pretty overwhelming. I'm trying my best here without a guide, okay? I also buy the ping pong modifier so that my spell rapidly jumps back and forth. The idea here is that if an enemy gets caught in the ping pong pattern, he will get tons of damage. Well, what I haven't thought about was that the spell disappears once it hits an enemy rather than going through it. So I now basically just have a standard projectile with a flight pattern that makes it really hard to hit something. Great. And it didn't help that as soon as I got to the next biome, there was an all-out fight between different enemies happening. I somehow managed to survive it and then found out it was way easier to hit stuff when I was aiming in the opposite direction. So I then switched to my rocket launcher wand, because not only do these rocks fly where I aim towards, no, they also home in on enemies. But all this fighting took a massive toll on my health, and after some more running around, I got hit by a jetpack soldier appearing out of nowhere and died my first death. I mean, say what you want, but I think that was a pretty decent first run. Surely I will have no problems beating the boss at least once in 99 more attempts, right? Right? They too greeted me with some dirt falling from the sky, but since I couldn't fly high enough to see where it was coming from, I decided to ignore it and just head straight into the mines, where I found a slimy egg and tried to kill some spiderlings with it. But instead of killing them, a friendly poison jellyfish spawned who then took care of the critters. Unfortunately, it was not the brightest light bulb in the box and I had to make sure to not move away too far in order for it to follow me. The next couple of minutes, me and Henry explored the mines together and killed every enemy we've encountered, but unfortunately his relatives were not amused by the fact that he was on my team and decided to unalive him. After a couple more minutes and some questionable decisions like standing in acid while picking up potions, I was down to just 2 HP, but luckily I managed to find a portal shortly after. In the safe room, I picked up a perk that grants me a projectile repelling barrier to wherever I'm aiming at and bought a wand at 50% off which shoots giant rocks. There were just 2 problems with it. First, in order for the rocks to not fall straight to the ground, I had the no respect to my aim modifier on it, which I knew could very much kill me. And second, it had an abysmal mana regenerate, which meant I could only shoot like 3 times with it before I had to wait 60 or so seconds. Unfortunately, the rocks also had a mana cost of 100, which meant putting the spells into another wand was no option for now. I then tried to bomb my way to a wand I saw underneath the safe room, but my bombs sadly weren't capable of destroying the brickwork. So I went to the coal pits and got greeted by a dynamite stick to the face at my very first encounter. I then decided that my starter wand was once again too weak and switched to my fireball wand, even though I knew it had only limited use. After some exploring, I came across another wand which was not exceptionally strong either, but good enough to ditch my starter wand. Also, the fire trail the projectiles left behind just looked super cool. I then stumbled across an enemy I never saw in this biome up until now, and in my panic I decided to switch to my rock thrower, which actually killed him off pretty easily. At this point I was once again very close to dying, so I made my way to the next portal as quickly as possible. The perks here all were rather average, but after the incident in my last 100 days video, I try not to take any passives that trigger upon getting hit. So I went for more health. After that I upgraded my primary wand with a magic arrow and reduced its cast delay while giving my rock some extra mana. Also, I just now realized while watching the recording that the reason the rocks don't just fall to the ground is not the heavy spread modifier, but the projectile repelling barrier I picked up earlier. Projectile repelling. Come on, I really could have figured that one out. Well, unfortunately, past me didn't realize that, and so I went on to the snowy depths, where I instantly had to fight an army of soldiers, but thanks to my mad wand tinkering skills, I managed to defeat them without losing too much health. The same goes for my next encounter against 2 ice skulls. Enemies I normally struggle with. Just ignore me flying straight through the freezing vapor, taking unnecessary damage. Freshly motivated, I tried to take on one of those super tanky cannons, but soon realized that that was a bad idea and ran straight into a freezing bolt from an ice mage dude. This is where I realized that I was still in fact playing Noita and every mistake could be my last. Well, and after some more, now much more careful fights, I once again reached the safe room. There I bought the petrify spell that turns wounded enemies into stone and attached it to my main wand. For my perk I picked up melee immunity and then went on to the next biome, the Heezy base, with those really annoying flying laser beam shooting enemies. That's what I call them from now on, by the way. I managed to blow one of them up with my bomb and decided it was not worth trying to take on the second one, so I ran. Straight to a wand which fires 5 arrows simultaneously, replacing my rock thrower. With that, all of the soldiers were basically one-shots, making progressing through the base much easier. If it weren't for those damn laser shooters. Because believe it or not, while those arrows prove to be very effective against humanoids, they deal no damage to mechanical enemies. And after being cornered by one of them, the hydrant behind me blew up and killed me. Damn, that was only my second run and I've been doing great so far. I mean, compared to the last time at least. But let's be real, Noita is still tough as nails and no one wants to sit through every single brutal fail in excruciating detail. Especially not me. So from now on, I will take you through my wildest, most epic runs and I'll throw in some quick recaps of my deaths in between. Like dying to a sniper while being immune to explosion damage. Or getting killed by a tiny speck of fire. How about accidentally polymorphing myself instead of an enemy? Don't worry, there's more. Drenching myself with a speed potion and running straight into a fire dude. Picking up the gold curse and losing the ability to touch the ground, or simply drowning in the overworld. Speaking of which, on day 13 I spawned with a firebolt wand, and since many of you guys hinted at the world being much bigger than just the caves I explored so far, I tried to, well, just go up. So I blasted a little crevice into the side of the mountain to rest on, and would you look at that, it's actually possible to get to the top of it and explore the overworld. The first thing I noticed was that it was suspiciously empty. And Noita being Noita, I expected to get ambushed by a giant worm or even God himself at any moment. But nothing, and after about a minute of walking, I stumbled across a little lake with a weird organ or something laying on the ground. I had no idea what to do with it, so I dove down a couple of times and destroyed it. And since nothing seemed to have happened, I decided to move on. I then stumbled across a little cave with 2 zombies in it, but other than that it was a dead end. Shortly after I entered the desert, a whole new overworld biome I have never seen before. Here I discover some ruins buried in the sand, a lowly dynamite thrower, and this huge skull of what seemed like some sort of giant birch which died here a long time ago. I don't know what that thing is, but I'm glad it's dead. Once I made my way through the desert, I found a huge mountain-like structure, and as I climbed it, I was able to see enemies from the very last biome in there. On top of the structure was a mysterious orb with an emerald tablet by its side. I read what was written on it in the hopes to gain some insight to what that orb is, but I couldn't make any sense of it. So I just interacted with the orb, fully ready to trigger a boss fight or something. To my surprise, nothing happened, and inside the orb I found the earthquake spell. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to equip it here, so I resumed to my grand overworld adventure. On my way down, I learned that the structure is called the Pyramid, and a little further down the road found another orb. I wasn't able to interact with that one, so I did what everyone would have done and shot it multiple times, destroying the orb in the process. I bet it's part of one of Noita's many secrets and has a very specific use case, but I'm miles away from figuring stuff like that out yet. I then stumbled across the watchtower, which is basically just a tower riddled with small scorpions and not much else going on. Once I climbed to the top of it, I could see that there was some sort of chamber surrounded by lava, but unfortunately I had no way of getting in there. So I decided to move on. And not long after, I found another one of those organ things just ominously vibrating. Turns out this was just because it got spawned in a weird way and nothing a small magic bolt couldn't fix. But since this one is not submerged in water, it meant I could actually interact with it. And by that I mean kick it. And lo and behold, it started to play music. So after vibing for a bit and waiting for something to happen, I just left and went my way. And as the music faded in the background, I stumbled upon what looked like the end of the overworld, clearly marked by a giant wall of extremely dense rock. The only thing is, it looks so climbable. And so I did. I climbed and climbed, moving from one ledge to the next, and after what felt like an eternity, I arrived. I just couldn't exactly tell where, and the game wasn't helpful either, since it just displayed 3 question marks. It was some kind of big room with a stone structure floating in the middle, and in it was a spell, or a symbol of a spell, since it didn't look like the ones you could buy or pick up. My theory is that maybe I would have to use this specific spell on the structure for something to happen, but since I didn't have it with me at the time, I felt there was nothing I could do in this room, and since this time there was an actual roof and no way to get any further, at least from what I saw, I figured it would be time to make my way back to the dungeon entrance. Because, you know, I still have a boss to defeat and stuff. So after a very long journey back, I was finally ready to properly start my run, which just went horribly. I choked on the first fire dude that I saw, took so much damage, and in the end I survived with just 15 HP. Any other run I would be fine with dying in the first biome. You know, it happens, just move on to the next try. But I need to try out the earthquake spell I got at least once. So I ignored every enemy and tried to make my way to the portal without risking a fight. And despite some close calls, I somehow made it. I first picked up the boomerang spells perk, which makes spells arc towards me, but in exchange grants them extra speed and damage, and then buy a black hole wand to dig through some terrain if needed. I tested and nearly killed myself, because who would have thought that making projectile arc towards you means projectiles actually arc towards you? But whatever, time to test the earthquake. So I switched some spells around, and after a little sizzle, the whole fucking cave collapses. And on top of that, I have angered the gods, which spawns this super annoying and extremely strong skeleton mage. The only good thing is that he can't see me because I'm buried under a huge pile of collapsed rocks. And since the only thing I can do at this point is trying to free myself and face him, I do exactly that. I equip a black hole, break free, and give my best to hit him with them. But all of my efforts are in vain because, as you can see, Skeleton Boy over here completely whoops my ass. To be honest, I'm not even sure if the black hole deals any damage. I just figured that it would because it's, you know, a black hole. And that was attempt 13. Now let's skip ahead a few runs to attempt 23, because that was the first time I really felt that glimpse of godlyhood you can achieve when combining the right spells and perks. Funnily enough, it only began to feel like that after the third biome. Before that, I only managed to pick up some mediocre perks like the projectile eating ghost and the ability to use explosive spells as throwable items. But when I found the exploding corpses perk, which also grants me explosion immunity, I knew that this could be the turning point. And after picking up a wand that summons protecting lights around me and a passive which damages enemies next to me, I decided that my strat for this attempt would be Suicide Bomber. As in, I cast a few bombs which thanks to a spell modifier circle around me and then just straight up run at my enemies. I also made a few adjustments to my wand and now I'm able to infinitely cast the protecting lights around me, making me look like I belong at the top of a Christmas tree. Admittedly, the whole run up until now wasn't that exciting. That's why I skipped the majority of it, but now it's finally time to see my build in action. Works like a charm. Well, except for the fact that I'm not immune to fire damage, and who would have thought that after a massive explosion, there's fire literally raining from the sky. And after taking way too much damage from it, I realized I had no idea what the fuck was going on. Everything was glowing or on fire, there were enemies everywhere, and that's when I decided it was time to panic. I ignored everything and just tried to get the hell out of there, just spamming my protective lights. Unfortunately, I trapped myself in a little crevice filled with acid and died shortly after. And yeah, I know the Noita veterans out there are probably laughing at me thinking that's nothing, but honestly, something just clicked. For a brief glorious moment while the bombs orbited around me like loyal minions, just waiting for the right moment to strike, I felt like I became death. And just like that, reality hit me hard, reminding me that Noita doesn't let you feel invincible for long. You know what that means? It's time for another fun round of horrible ways to die in Noita. Killing myself with a laser drill because I got stuck in terrain, getting obliterated by an enemy who picked up a goaded wand, dying right next to the portal because I greeted for a little more gold, getting shot in the back by a trap in the last biome while also having super strong wands with which I 100% would have killed the boss if I made it through, and of course the classic, not even knowing what killed me. The next run I wanna highlight is number 142. It once again started out as a pretty standard run. I made my way through the first biome and picked up the unlimited spells perk, which in my opinion is one of the best in the game. But since I didn't have any powerful wands yet, I shrugged it off and didn't think much of it. That changed when in the second save room I bought a wand that lets me fire eggs from which friendly minions spawn. You see, those spells are usually limited to a 3 times use only, but thanks to my unlimited spells passive, I could just summon as much as I like. So I did exactly that. And let me tell you, it was amazing running through the dungeon while being followed by a massive army of loyal minions. Did I have to summon that many? No, but I did it anyway. In fact, I summoned so much my game began lagging. So I came up with a new strategy. Standing on a ledge and blindly firing my axe into the darkness, hoping my friends would deal with all of the enemies down there. Which they did for the most part. They struggled a little bit with the artillery enemy, but who can blame them? So I moved on full of confidence, thinking I had everything under control. But the thing with being overconfident is that you are more likely to make mistakes. And that's exactly what happened. As I was flying around a corner, I got hit in the face by a frost mage, and in my panic I tried to escape by flying back up. Which coincidentally is the exact same way the freezing vapor went. Cause of death? Being dumb. But you guys know what's not dumb? Subscribing to the channel. It might be just a simple click for you, but to me every new subscriber is an endorphin rush better than a spoonful of meth. Let's move on. Attempt 148 started out great. I pretty much immediately found a wand that could fire shotgun shells with the speed of an automatic rifle. And besides being good at killing enemies, it was also the perfect mining tool. Forget Noita guys, we now play Terraria. So I mine and fight my way through the second biome, find some upgrades and new wands, which unfortunately didn't have the best spells on them, and make my way to the safe room. Upon reaching it, I tinker a bit with my wands, reroll the perks and get a 50% health boost. The third biome starts out a bit rough since I had some problems taking on a sniper artillery enemy, but after finding a rocket launcher wand, it was pretty smooth sailing. At least until this ghost guy here found a decent wand himself. I got hit a few times, but in the end I managed to take him down. The wand itself seemed super strong at first glance since it had like 15 of the shotgun spells attached, but it had a much slower fire rate, so I decided to keep mine for now, especially since I could easily deal with the enemies in the easy base with it. I also picked up a fire immunity perk, which is one of the best perks in the game. It feels like this is slowly but surely turning into one of those runs where everything just falls into place. So from that moment on, I was just waiting for Noita to do what it does best. Rip everything away from me. I played super cautious, trying not to take unnecessary risks, and managed to get lucky again by finding a wand that shoots electric bolts, which I couldn't use because of the attached spell modifier. I continued my murderous journey through the Hezi base and managed to amass 2.6k gold as I went on to the next safe room. But it was there that Noita decided I had enough fun for today and I angered the gods for no apparent reason. Which of course meant my old friend, the giant flying skeleton mage with the spell shield spawned. Luckily, I had a decent amount of HP left, so I decided to just body him since we all know hesitation means defeat. And to be honest, it worked out way better than expected. But as I went on to collect my well-earned gold, even more enemies appeared. Unfortunately for them, they don't know how much of a pro gamer I am and made short work of them. Phew, now it was finally time to take a look at the perks. But I didn't find them very useful, so I had to reroll twice before finally settling in on the phasing perk. I then tinkered a bit with my wand to make the electric bolts actually usable and moved on to the underground jungle, a biome which I really struggle with. The enemies in here have no business being that tanky, and even with my strongest wands I had trouble killing some of them. So I was more than happy to find multiple health upgrades, and I even managed to find the exit rather quickly. But instead of a safe space to fill up my health and spells, I was met with round 2 of Calpinet vs Skeleton Guy. And this time things didn't go so smoothly. I couldn't get near him, and every time I tried to fire from a distance his shield would deflect the spells. I even had to retreat and replenish my health. But it seemed he was already halfway to death because after just a few more shots he went down. And after picking up the invisibility perk, I entered the vault, where I immediately blew my cover and started an all-out fight with multiple enemies where I immediately lost half of my HP. What a great way to start a biome. By this point I had learned how to use my wands effectively, and after a little back and forth I was victorious. Once I got rid of the enemies, I ran around until my stain status went away so I could turn invisible again and stealth my way through the rest of the vault, which for the most part worked exactly as intended. I had to blast a path for myself at one point, but other than that there were no complications. I entered the next safe room, and since I was invisible this time around, Skeleton Boy didn't attack me. Better yet, I managed to find the Peace with the Gods perk, which let me befriend him. And after wetting myself so he could see me and my new buddy went on to the final biome, the Temple of Art. My plan here was to let him do all the fighting while I stay invisible and take no risks. Except that didn't work out at all, because after I got hit by a stray projectile I went to look after him, but all that was left was a sad pile of sand. So I resorted to fighting my way through. And while the smaller enemies were no problem, this goddamn purple crystal really effed me up. I somehow managed to take it down, but at this point I already lost half my health again. So back to stealth then, I guess. At one point I even waited for over a minute for some toxic gas to dissolve, because I was so afraid of getting hurt and turning visible again. But of course some random acid dropped from the ceiling and turned me visible anyway. And that was where the panic mode set in. I tried to run right to get rid of the stains, but since I exploded every time I took damage, I set free a huge fountain of water that absolutely drenched me. I tried to escape by shooting my way through some wooden beams which made lava rain on me, and after some more panicking and running away, I died by flying right through this giant translucent amoeba. And that's the story of how I found out that the giant intimidating skeleton dude is actually absolutely useless as a companion. The next few attempts were all pretty terrible, so I won't even bother showing you how I died. Instead, I'm gonna jump straight to run 166, because that's where things got interesting again. It started out like many runs before it, with me nearly dying in the first biome, but at least I managed to snag myself a chest full of gold before moving on. For my first perk I picked up the Saving Grace, which resurrects me with 1 HP after dying, and then bought a new wand which fires the same projectiles as the one I got at the start, but faster. The first thing I did in the coal pits was waste 50 HP on a lava bee nest, which netted me a total of 0 gold. Absolutely worth it if you ask me. I then go on to lose even more of my life in the next few encounters, to the point where I barely managed to survive with 3 HP. I promise this run gets better. So after I somehow managed to escape, I found my favorite perk once more, invisibility, and after upgrading my wands it was off to the snowy depths, where after the shit show just now I decided to ignore the majority of the enemies and go for the pacifist chest if the opportunity arises. So I went on exploring the area, find some new wands that were pretty bad, and before I knew it I went so far left that I entered the magical temple, an area I stumbled across a few times already, but always decided to turn back since it's so dark in here I barely could see anything. But this time I thought, screw it, let's see what's in here. What follows are 3 minutes of me slowly making my way through the area 1 inch at a time. I avoided the enemies that I could see, including those bright green eyes of horror, and since I was invisible, I eventually made my way through without any complications. And then I found it. The orb room, and on an altar in the middle of it laid the holy hand grenade. Next to it was one of those emerald tablets which said something about counting to 3, but I immediately forgot about it as soon as I picked up the orb. Okay, all that's left to do now is go back the way I came from and find the exit. Unfortunately, I walked straight into a stream of toxic fumes poisoning me and turning me visible. I then got attacked by one of those ghost dudes, tried to run away but somehow only ran into more enemies. I knew my wands were way too weak to fight them, so my only chance was to turn invisible again. It really looked like I would die there, but after getting my ass saved by the Saving Grace perk, I managed to go invis again and escape the magical temple with 1 HP left. After that, I of course avoided all of the enemies and went straight for the portal. In the safe room, I picked up the faster movement perk and equipped the holy hand grenade to one of my wands. I decided to not test it out just yet because I was very aware of the possibility of blowing myself up in this small confined space. So this bad boy had to wait till I was either in danger or absolutely sure I couldn't kill myself with it. Let's move on. The Heezy base was surprisingly straightforward because I actually managed to get through without turning visible even once, which netted me the pacifist reward. I then rerolled the available perks with the little gold I had and chose the one where creatures got more aggressive towards each other. In the underground jungle, I tried exploring a little more, and while doing so I stumbled across the fungal caverns, which, just like the magical temple, is a little extra biome next to the main one. I was hoping to find a cool new spell or some super strong wand, but all I could find were some aggressive bees, a wand which shoots homing missiles, and some extra health. Still better than nothing, I guess. Especially since I'm starved of gold from not killing many enemies. So on to the next safe room, where I find a meh wand in the pacifist chest. But to make up for it, Noita also rewarded me with one of the best perks in the game: unlimited spells. Those 20 homing missiles I got? Yeah, I now have unlimited of those. And oh, what's that? Even the holy grenade now has unlimited uses. I mean, not that I know how strong it is yet, but I'm sure something called the holy freaking grenade will obliterate everything in my way, including the final boss. Let's move on to the vault. And since I didn't feel the need to go and explore much with my current loadout, I just tried to get through it as quick as possible, which worked like a charm thanks to the invisibility. I didn't even look at the spells in the safe room since I only had like 200 gold at this point and got greeted by a cheesy bomb as my pacifist reward. Oh Noita, you just couldn't help yourself, am I right? The perk I got this time was the all-seeing eye, so I could always pick the best route and avoid as many enemies as possible. Because no matter how often I manage to get to the last biome, I will never be not afraid of all those powerful enemies in here. So I did what I was best at and avoided all the creatures in here. Or at least I tried, because one of them managed to polymorph me into a tiny little cloud. I then hopped over to the huge wand sitting there and spammed my E key to instantly pick it up after turning back to normal. A little bit later I got hit by a fire trap which broke my invisibility, but I managed to regain it fairly quickly since there weren't many enemies around. Unfortunately, I got hit by the same trap on my way back, which then resulted in the all too familiar panic mode. But thanks to my movement speed buff, I managed to dodge every projectile like a pro. I mean, just look at that. And after some more running around and avoiding another one of those polymorph projectiles, I finally found the last portal. I even turned around to quickly pick up another wand. In the safe room, I chose the perk that gives my currently held wand more mana, and I used it on the one with the holy grenade attached. You know, just in case. I recharged my health and spells, and then it was finally time to face the end boss once again. My strategy was simple: penetrate his shield with some quick firebolts and then let the missiles do most of the damage. And if all that fails, just spam the grenade. Side note, it took me roughly 100 attempts to get here since the last time I fought him. Okay, no mistakes this time. I picked up the weird gear thing, started the fight and instantly started blasting. Unfortunately, what I believed to be a simple shield was more than that. It was one of those spell deflector things which not only sucked my projectiles in but also turned my missiles against me. But since my only strategy was to keep shooting, I did exactly that, all while trying to dodge his attacks. And now that I see myself in the recording, I can tell I did a terrible job at doing so. I mean, I get hit by so many projectiles, it's kind of embarrassing. I wish I could say I still had some sort of master plan up my sleeve, but after dropping to an alarming amount of health, I decided it was time for my Hail Mary. So I switched once and fired my first holy grenade. I expected a giant explosion of some sort, but all I could see were some sparks at the edge of my screen. I tried spamming as many grenades as possible and even managed to survive with 1 HP for some time, but in the end, Call Missile bested me once again. Man, in hindsight, I'm wondering if the Emerald tablet tried to tell me I should keep the grenade button held a few seconds for more firepower, because I was pretty disappointed with the holy grenade. For those interested, here's a quick look at my stats. But there is no time to sit here and cry over spilled milk, because there is one more run I would like to talk about. Run 198. Just 2 runs before my challenge ended. At this point, I had some absolutely goated runs under my belt, like the one where I had 5 times more powerful spells, a wand that caused an explosion and explosion immunity. I died in the most frustrating ways the game has to offer, like a drive-by by a crystal, but still didn't manage to beat the game even once. Let's see if I managed to change this. Shall we? The first biome was pretty uneventful, so I'll skip over it. But I did find 2 hearts for extra health, which is always nice to have. My first perk was phasing, letting some projectile pass right through me, and I picked up a cheap wand on a 50% discount. It came with a bunch of random spells, but I was really just interested in one, the Chain Bolt. Honestly, it's one of the best early game spells, practically one-shotting anything without even needing to aim properly. As I made my way through the coal pits to farm some gold, I noticed an unusually high number of wands scattered around. One of them stacked with 5 giant firebolt spells. I then ran into a ghost dude who, when defeated, dropped a massive pile of money. And after running past a shop that was just randomly sitting there out in the open, I headed through the portal into the next safe room. There I picked up the projectile repulsion field perk and made it so my wand now shoots 3 giant fireballs instead of just 1. Of course I had to immediately test it out, and as you can see, this normally very tanky egg throwing enemy here stood absolutely no chance. And as it turns out, the repulsion field is not only useful against missiles, but also against those pesky lightning bolts. So I fought my way through the snowy depths, killing everything in my path without even breaking a sweat, all while collecting tons of gold. A portion of which I used to reroll the available perks to get myself fire immunity. And after optimizing my wands, I was off to the Heezy base, where I continued my domination of the local enemies. Turns out that with the right loadout, just shooting your way through is much easier than trying to avoid fights at all costs. Especially when you can one-shot multiple enemies at the same time like I did here. I even found a named wand called Vita, which gave me an additional large fireball to work with. And so I continued my murderous spree and managed to clear the biome without any trouble. In the save room I rerolled again and managed to get myself a permanent shield. I then made myself a pretty decent shotgun wand and headed onto the underground channel. And what can I say, guys, I just kept fighting and somehow it kept working. Even those huge spider things were no match for the firepower of my wands. And by the time I reached the portal, I still had over 100 HP left and a ton of gold in my pockets. I considered exploring a little more, but I felt my loadout was decent enough and I didn't want to risk anything. I rerolled the perks once again, something I could never afford in my invisibility runs, and got super lucky with the explosion immunity. I'm not gonna lie, at this point I feel pretty invincible. But Noita kicked my butt too many times for me to get overconfident, so I'm just gonna play it like I did until now and not get too overconfident. And would you look at that, the first group I stumbled across in the vault consists of no less than 4 laser drones and some smaller enemies. But thanks to my powerful ones, I managed to get rid of them without even breaking a sweat. Even the hydrant blowing up right next to me was no threat thanks to my explosion immunity. And a little bit later, the projectile force field once more showed its worth because this enemy over here just couldn't touch me. I'm not even 2 minutes into the biome and already picked up over 1000 gold. Man, I really should consider killing enemies more often. Anyways, I continued my journey through the biome, just killing everything in my way, and found the portal pretty easily. Before jumping in, I tried to clean up the enemies in its vicinity for some more gold, but for some reason I really struggled against this one jetpack guy and decided to bail. Not that it really mattered, because the spells in the next safe room were so expensive I couldn't afford a single one. So I spent most of my gold to reroll once again and got myself some extra armor. And after tinkering with my wands, which mostly just go boom with some added modifiers, I went on to the final biome, where I was greeted by an enemy even before officially entering it. But the oversized skeleton fly posed no threat to me and I obliterated it without any problems, just like I did with the first proper group of enemies. Thinking of it, this might actually be the first run where I actively sought out to fight and kill all of the enemies in here instead of cowering in corners or running away. Admittedly, my projectile repelling field did most of the heavy lifting, but man, that feels good. I didn't even get hit by all those monsters. Well, at least not until I killed a dude who was just straight up bleeding teleport potion and got teleported right in front of this tentacle thing. but I made short work of it and then started to panic a little as I saw a translucent amoeba approaching me. I don't think I'm able to deal any damage to it, so I got the hell out of there. As I fought my way through the dungeon, I came to the realization that this might not be as easy as I thought it would be, because even with my very potent wands and super strong perks, I took a good amount of damage on the way. So I knew I needed to get to the portal sooner rather than later. And luckily I actually managed to find it within just a few minutes. There I was, in the final safe room once again. But this time I actually felt I was ready for the boss. For my final perk I chose the gambling one, which grants me 2 random passives. And got absolutely nothing of use. But that didn't bother me that much, because one of the purchasable wands was filled to the brim with the Path of Dark Flame spell. You know, the one those annoying skull flies constantly shoot. And since this wasn't my first rodeo with the boss, I knew that I would need something that helped me to get through his shield before my fireballs could actually deal any damage to him. So I bought the wand, tested it out, and discovered that my projectile repelling aura also repelled my own spells, granting the flames some extra speed and reach. Well, I guess it's finally time to go and attempt the boss for the 3rd time. There he was, the bane of my existence, Call Me Zilme himself. I had my wands, my game plan, and most importantly a ton of perks that should protect me from the worst. So I hopped off the platform, preemptively fired some of my dark flames and grabbed his gear-shaped thing, triggering the fight. I opened with a barrage of dark flames, which due to the amount of them absolutely destroyed his shield, and then switched to my magic missiles to deal big damage. Only thing was, the missiles did actually not deal the intended big damage. Once I realized that, I quickly switched back to the dark flames and just committed to them. And what can I say, as you see, they easily managed to get through his defense, and thanks to my passives his attacks couldn't even reach me. This went on for a bit until he summoned a minion and began using his fire ring attack. That was the first time I actually received some damage during this fight, and he was already down to just a sliver of his health bar. Knowing I could just ignore the minion, I fully focused on the boss, even flying straight into him for a maximum damage. And then finally, after 198 runs and on my 3rd boss attempt, I managed to defeat him. This spawned another red portal, and after finishing off the remaining minion, I jumped straight into it. This teleported me to the work. Here I picked up a golden statue, which coincidentally looked just like my player character, flew around the room for a bit, and then completed the work, which turned everything, including myself, into pure gold. And with that, the credits finally rolled across my screen. Now, I know many of you guys said under my last video that this was just a quote-unquote tutorial boss, but man, I cannot stress enough how relieved I felt at this moment. After the credits were done, I just sat there admiring the info box. Especially this tiny little one that stood next to my total wins. So yeah, this concludes my Noita journey for now. If you would like to see another one of these, feel free to let me know in the comments. And if you do so, don't forget to include some hints on what there is to do in Noita besides killing the boss, because I'm still refusing to watch any guides or wikis about Noita. Oh, and those last 2 runs that were left for the 200 days? Yeah, just forget them, I didn't make it very far in those. Feel free to like and subscribe, see you in the next one, bye.